Panzironi, in this episode we are going to talk about one of the most common eating disorders, exactly bulimia, and we are going to find out what it is with this video.
What is bulimia? Bulimia, in addition to its literal meaning, refers to an extreme hunger similar to that of an ox, which is known as ox hunger. Bulimia is closely tied to anorexia and can be considered a disorder directly linked to it. People with bulimia generally maintain a normal weight because being overweight is rare in this condition. This is because binge eating occurs, where large amounts of food are consumed in a short period of time. These episodes of eating are characterized by an intense and voracious appetite. However, compensatory behaviors usually accompany binge eating. These compensatory behaviors may include purging, fasting, or excessive exercise. Thus, bulimia encompasses not only binge eating, but also these compensatory behaviors that individuals engage in to manage their intake.
Presenting Mr. Panzironi, Professor Stefano Erzegovesi enlightened us on the origin of bulimia. It essentially connotes an intense longing for food, resembling the hunger of an ox.
Yes, I think it's a really apt term because we know that these people start eating, practically gorging themselves to the point of almost bursting. And so it's clear that it's a pathology related to food itself and it's pathological in nature.
Mr. Panzironi, can you convey the prevalence of this particular eating disorder?
8,000 new bulimia patients are diagnosed every year, and there are about 150,000 of them in Italy, mostly women, in a 10-to-1 ratio with men, and in the age group of 15 to 20. In reality, however, I have to say that there are many people, even adults, who are beginning to suffer from this condition.
Our primary objective, as stated before, is to provide comprehensive and publicly accessible information. To fulfill this purpose, I would like to present a video that educates on the identification and understanding of bulimic individuals. Let us proceed to watching this video.
During mealtimes, we often observe a common occurrence. It is in these moments that we may notice an individual losing the sociable aspect commonly associated with dining. Rather than engaging in conversation and finding relaxation while eating, they become excessively focused on the act of consuming food. In contrast to anorexia, the main characteristic setting bulimia apart is the inclination to exhibit a voracious attitude, which becomes particularly evident when there is a hurried desire to distract oneself from eating. If you happen to witness someone deviating from their usual behavior and displaying an anxious demeanor as they hastily abandon their meal, it should raise suspicion. Take note, especially towards the end of the meal, to assess the urgency with which this person may yearn to retreat to the restroom. It is essential to acknowledge that binge eating, in the case of bulimia, typically occurs in secrecy, unnoticed by others.
Here it was Professor Erzegovesi again, and he explained to us what are the premonitory signs to understand if a person, maybe even close to us, is bulimic or not.
Yes, it is absolutely fundamental that we need to know what are the symptoms of our pathologies, both in ourselves but also in the people who are close to us. And this really gives us the opportunity to understand whether we are sick, because we remember that we can only think about healing if we put ourselves in the mental condition to recognize our pathologies. So this kind of information is really important, but especially in this kind of problem of bulimia, a fundamental role of food should be recognized, which induces precisely the appearance of this phenomenon of almost atavistic hunger.
Mr. Panzironi, besides mentioning food, it is important to note that official medicine also emphasizes how food is strongly linked to the severity of eating disorders. In order to further emphasize this point, I propose sharing a video with you. Following that, we can discuss and analyze its content collaboratively.
The intake of food also produces substances in the body, and this gives a sense of relief because it fills from emptiness, because concrete presences, interesting the image of 9/11, because concrete presences compared to a collapse is an emptiness, support identity a lot. For example, adolescents use the concreteness of the body a lot to support themselves, from piercing to tattoos or self-cutting behaviors when they cut themselves. Concrete presence fills versus emptiness. So eating 2 croissants, that means putting something in, is a very important anchor, just as anorexics give up the body completely. For example, bulimics in times of emergency fill themselves completely and live inside physical sensations. This search for physical sensation is the key element, the link between food and our emotional difficulties.
Here, this was Professor Lucio Rinaldi, who believes that food practically represents a means by which, for example, young people, as the professor obviously said, go to fill a void precisely with food that has been left inside by perhaps previous trauma.
I can tell you that we are not quite there, because while it is true that food plays a key role, obviously, in bulimia, but this is not because it tends to fill a void left by childhood problems or trauma, but simply because what we eat goes to restore the production of certain hormones or neurotransmitters. As long as official medicine continues to fail to understand the true causes of diseases, it will certainly also get the way of treating them wrong.
The way to treat, so the treatment, I can tell you that official medicine has treatment protocols for this disease that I want you to listen to. Let's look at it together.
Hunger, often stemming from a dearth of love in childhood, manifests as a longing for affection. When we lack nurturing from our mother or caregiver figures, we might seek solace in food, attempting to compensate for what we are lacking emotionally. However, this form of appeasement ultimately falls short. The actual solution lies in mastering effective psychotherapy, delving into the heart of the problem, understanding its underlying causes. We must delve even further than our innate yearning for recognition, love, and tenderness, surpassing the deeply rooted negative cognitive beliefs that haunt us, the pervasive notion that we are unworthy, unlovable, and flawed. When these detrimental thoughts play on repeat in our unconscious mind, we become trapped in a vicious cycle that culminates in behaviors like bulimia. It is imperative that we seek professional help to break free from this pattern.
Here, he was Dr. Roberto Ausilio, who basically confirmed that bulimia depends on emotional deficiencies, so it should be treated with psychotherapy.
As I mentioned earlier, not understanding the cause of a pathology can lead to using incorrect treatment methods. Research indicates that individuals with bulimia have a decrease or underregulation of the opioid system, which is related to the production of dopamine. People suffering from bulimia have a significantly lower production of dopamine. Therefore, it is essential to consider the biological and biochemical aspects rather than solely psychological factors when approaching bulimia. Overall, it is crucial to ensure that the treatment methods used address these underlying physiological issues.
So, it seems, Mr. Panzironi, that you are suggesting that individuals with bulimia experience a decrease in dopamine production, which leads them to seek out specific foods that can effectively increase dopamine production. Can you provide information on what types of food those might be?
First of all, we have to remember that dopamine is that neurotransmitter that is stimulated by drugs. That is why when we eat carbohydrates, we have this sense of reward and pleasure that then causes us to eat more carbohydrates. Obviously, what are the foods are those that are the basis of the Mediterranean diet. So with high glycemic index or glycemic load, because many studies tell us that precisely when we eat these foods, we raise insulin, and insulin acts directly on the neurotransmitters, on the neurons, to produce precisely dopamine. So we have spikes, and therefore we make the receptors precisely of these neurons insensitive.
Look, Panzironi, you have explained to us so many times that after a carbohydrate-rich meal, there is practically cortisol activation. Does this hormone play a role in this pathology?
Definitely, that is correct. This is attributed to the fact that many individuals with bulimia also experience depression. It is well known that in people suffering from depression, the circadian rhythms of the cortisol hormone undergo a change. In this specific scenario, scientific research indicates that cortisol acts as an activator on dopamine receptors. Consequently, elevated levels of cortisol inhibit the production of dopamine by neurons, leading to a decrease in feelings of satisfaction and joy. To compensate for this, individuals tend to rely on consuming more carbohydrates, as it assists in reactivating the release of insulin. This cycle continues due to the complex interaction between hormonal and neurotransmitter systems.
Listen, Panzironi, in our broadcasts, we have discussed several hormones. Among them, we have delved into cholecystokinin, the hormone responsible for satiety, and ghrelin, the hormone that triggers hunger. Now let's explore if these hormones also have an impact on bulimia.
Absolutely, yes. Because when we see that these people literally gorge themselves with food, so they have a mechanical type of satiety. So on the one hand, we activate mechanical satiety, but on the other hand, because they haven't eaten fat and protein, we don't activate cholecystokinin, which is what gives us satiety. Instead, chemical, what would allow us not to eat until the next meal. And what do these people do? They go to the bathroom, they go immediately to vomit, so they are left with hunger because it is finished with the so-called mechanical satiety. So absolutely, when we have, let's say, the alteration of this hormone, we also go to worsen the clinical picture, and therefore we can say that a real perfect storm is created.
Thank you for consistently providing impeccable explanations to me. Now it is time in the focus to bring in a person who comes to tell us about his journey of healing through the Life 120 lifestyle on this disease. So I would ask for Mr. Maximilian Gigantino to come into the studio. Good evening. Welcome. I invite you to have a seat. So before I talk to Mr. Massimiliano Gigantino, I want to mention that the people, the witnesses who come in our broadcasts are not actors. They are ordinary people who come here and tell their own healing journey thanks to the Life 120 lifestyle designed by Adriano Panzironi. So I would first and foremost like to applaud him again. We are immensely grateful to all the individuals who faithfully come episode after episode to share their deeply personal and intimate experiences with us. We truly appreciate their courage in opening up and want to extend a special thank you to our Gigantino and all the extraordinary guests who join us during our episodes. Shall we commence a dialogue, Gigantino, and progress in an organized manner, commencing with your early days? Like any other infant, I imagine you had a distinct method of nourishment after being detached from breastfeeding. Would you kindly disclose the type of nourishment you received?
The classic normal diet that every parent has of common sense, culturally belonging to the Mediterranean diet. So bread, pasta, pizza, especially pasta with legumes. Legumes make us grow by giving lots of protein and lots of vitamins to make us develop. But I couldn't. I was 3 years old when I was weaning, and I couldn't curb this biting hunger of mine, oppressive, you could say, atavistic, very heavy, spasmodic hunger, which I couldn't counteract, which I couldn't curb, confine, unfortunately. And this, of course, led me to eat all the time, even
you always
outside
had this
of meals.
Atavistic hunger, basically this spasmodic hunger. Also off meals and obviously gaining weight. With this condition, we find out you gain weight until you are 27 years old and weigh about 120 pounds. So you were huge, then you are not, is not very tall. So anyway, he was very fat.
I am approximately 5 feet 7 inches tall, and I have a significant amount of excess weight.
Then right at the age of 27, he goes for his medical examination for the military, and what happens that day? In particular?
An Air Force medical officer, seeing me together with other people who were more or less like me anyway, examining me, and they say with a sense of contempt, how disgusting, how one can be reduced like that. That was really the straw that broke the camel's back, and as a result I was so humiliated and felt totally despised, especially that since then I couldn't fight this sense of veracity of mine, this bulimic hunger of mine, this oppressive hunger of mine. However, on the other hand, I obviously couldn't, but I felt good, paradoxically, as if it were a drug, because I was a little bit partially satisfied anyway, and so I couldn't fight myself or this feeling of hunger that I had. And to counteract this mechanical hunger, this satiety that was not chemical but mechanical, stomach splitting, I claim, I undertook this vicious circuit of vomiting.
Of vomiting. Basically, you would binge and then vomit. Almost to have pure
Systematically.
pleasure in doing it, because you knew that then you could,
because it
you
fulfilled me.
wouldn't get fat, and then you could eat
I
again.
didn't gain weight. Of course, I lost weight, not only because of this activity, of course, but also because I self-imposed an even almost military-like discipline in running, in doing extreme physical activity.
So you also began practicing physical fitness. Out of curiosity, how frequently do you consume meals throughout the day?
The meals were full and large at lunch and dinner. However, I ate well and a lot in the morning, and also was of meal the croissants, the classic croissants.
Did you vomit every time you ate?
Especially at lunch and dinner. Especially at lunch and dinner, I used to fill up beyond measure because anyway, I couldn't restrain myself. I couldn't have this control of myself. My stomach, my hormones always demanded the fact of eating, this continuous hunger, and I then felt so bad. I couldn't breathe because anyway, then the stomach, by enlarging itself, goes to compress the diaphragm. And this also prevented me from breathing properly, and consequently, then I would automatically release right after.
Practicing this practice of vomiting, did you, after vomiting, yes, given your stomach, feel fulfilled?
Yes, I felt fulfilled because I was drained, and then I resumed my normal physical respiratory activity, of course. However, I resumed the vicious cycle of hunger, and then in order not to be discovered, because it was easy for me to be discovered anyway, I would fill my stomach with water, and I would urinate continuously until the next morning.
Would start in a vicious cycle. Here you, obviously, how have you lived these years based on this eating disorder?
With peaks in which I felt good because of the results I got from the sport I was playing. However, I was still very sick because anyway, this addiction, this vicious circuit then goes to affect all the relationships that are created, loving, friendly, study, especially social work, especially I in a phase where I had to study so much. I was eating all the time, sitting. So that was the worst phase. I was studying and eating and studying. And so I was as wide as this chair.
Here, then you know the Health Seeker, our broadcast, how does that happen?
Let's say zapping television between the end of 2018 and the beginning of 2019, I meet your program, a nice television program, The Health Seeker. I get curious because anyway, I'm always curious about all possible and imaginable aspects, our broad spectrum. I get curious about the figure of Adriano Panzironi. And from there, I start following him out of curiosity. Not because I was really interested in this lifestyle or this program, since he was saying and still says some very interesting things, in my opinion, and in my opinion very correct, then and considering that the testimonies, I always considered them valid, and therefore I always considered them to be true. I assume that nobody tells lies and nobody is sold or bought.
As I said before, thank you for repeating it.
I open a small parenthesis. I am here, and despite my psychological difficulties that I have overcome and am overcoming, Adriano has not given me a penny for this testimony. Is all true. It is all true. Let it be clear.
Thank you. Can you explain to us what things there are?
Out of curiosity, you buy the book because anyway, I see these people who were getting very good results in physical slimming, and I wanted to free myself from this slavery. I wanted to get results in physical slimming, however, in a healthy, correct way. Out of curiosity, I buy the book, I document myself, because I love to document myself before I do something, and I search the internet here and there. I study a lot of chapters, including all the phenomena of obesity and obese
written in one chapter of the book?
I fully fall into, that are explained to us in the various chapters, the various balances of hormones interacting with each other. Then in my mind, as a former bulimic, I admit that my eating habits were not healthy. Regardless of the quality of the food, I always gave it the benefit of the doubt and tried it, but when I reached my limit, I would vomit. However, on February 23rd, 2019, something unexpected happened. I consumed a couple of cans of cold cuts, approximately 200 to 300 grams of sliced meats, and alongside about 200 grams of vegetables. I cannot recall the exact weight, but what happened next was remarkable. I experienced a sensation of satiety explained in Adriano's book, causing me to automatically purge the food. This incident marked a turning point in my battle with bulimia.
The evening itself. Basically, you had dinner and you didn't vomit, so you didn't have the need.
I went to bed without having reflux, without having heaviness, without having respiratory problems.
What did you feel when you saw that you no longer vomited?
A sensation of being liberated, completely free from any form of confinement.
Obviously, you started recently because for about a little over...
Besides, I developed various health issues due to my excessive sugar and snack consumption. This included troublesome conditions like hemorrhoids and constipation. Fortunately, these problems were completely resolved thanks to the appropriate supplementation.
Let's go back to her bulimia, because she obviously...
Since then, I've become more self-disciplined after making multiple mistakes due to my love for round pizzas. I had a chronic problem of overeating pizzas from places like Pizza Round and Pizza at Will. As a result, I always ended up regretting it and facing the consequences. However, after making the last big mistake, I realized I needed to change. I no longer indulge in excessive beer drinking and have completely given up drinking beer.
So I ask you two sharp questions, basically. First, do you still perceive this atavistic hunger that has affected your whole life?
No, not anymore, no more. I am satiated.
Do you feel cured of bulimia?
I can say yes.
We are very happy about that. I really give you 30 seconds if you want to say something to our Adriano Panzironi, who is here.
Willingly to keep fighting and especially documenting, we need someone who has the courage to uncover Pandora's box and inform us. Information if you are a journalist, a good journalist, so keep doing it despite the attacks.
Thank you to our own Maximilian Gigantino for being here.